we're indoors today for another video, and we're in the kitchen, but we're not actually doing a cooking video. In fact, I'm going to talk to you today about metal halide lamps. Lighting with animals, especially reptiles, is a really big topic, and I've been asked plenty of times to do videos, a whole video series in fact. And the thing is, it'd be a massive task. I'd have to start at square one and make my way into more and more intricate theories and practices as the videos progressed. And if we did do that, this video you're watching now would probably be number 237 in the series. We're not doing that, at least not yet. So we go into this video with some basic agreements first. The first is that I'm going to talk about concepts like UVI, UVB, UVA 1 and 2, lux, and I'm going to presume that you have a base understanding of what those different things mean. I'm going to talk about the solar meters a little bit, and again, I'm going to presume you know what the differences are between them. I'm going to refer to the spectrum of lamps. Again, I'm going to presume you know what that means. And I'm going to use the word lamp quite a few times in this. Now, for anyone who's in America or Canada, you may prefer to use the word bulb when you talk about something like this, but technically it's a lamp, so I'm going to refer to it as a lamp in this video. And finally, I will be referring to my personal definition of full spectrum. I'm not going to be referring to the definition used by some companies when they're advertising, say, LEDs or fluorescent lamps. There's certainly some concepts in this video that aren't going to be necessarily friendly to beginners, but I'm going to try my best to make things make sense for you. So, we're on the same page? Cool, let's go. It's my honest opinion that animals in captivity are chronically underlit, especially reptiles. It's not uncommon for a pet shop to sell, say, a bearded dragon, something that comes from the desert, with a heat lamp and a T5 UVB system, and then for that to be called a day. But actually, if we measure the lux in the basking area for that enclosure, what you'd probably find is maybe 5,000 lux max. Whereas if we go to the Australian outback, where bearded dragons are from, you may find 120, 130,000 lux, which is a heck of a lot different. And that light has a whole host of biological benefits. We're talking things like hormone release, metabolism effects, gene upregulation, so much more. That extra light is really valuable in the enclosure. And one way to brighten up an enclosure would be to use a metal halide lamp. I get asked a lot of questions about metal halide lamps, and I see questions a lot posted on Facebook groups, subreddits, WhatsApp groups, Discord servers, you name it. And I want to think that this has something to do with the amount of times I've mentioned them on videos with reptiles and research and animals at home, for example. Now, I'm not blowing my own trumpet here. What I'm saying is, with tens of thousands of views on those videos, is it any surprise that a few more people want to know a little bit more about these lamps? And metal halide lamps come in a whole range of sizes and wattages, so we see questions about a whole range of them. But what even is a metal halide lamp? Without going into a history lesson, and this technology has been around for a long time, it essentially involves a little tube inside a lamp body like this. And in the little tube are a lot of different chemicals, and the chemicals are actually called metal halide salts. When you energize those metals, they vaporize and emit light. And if you've kept reptiles before, you've probably seen something like this, which is a mercury vapor bulb. Now, this works in a very similar way. They have a little tube inside called an arc tube, and inside that tube is mercury, which is a metal. Similar things exist with sodium lamps, which are those old street lights you used to get where it has that really orange glow. Well, get a mixture of different metals and pass a high intensity electrical arc through them, and they will all vaporize and mix together and they make white. And it's actually that high intensity arc that gives it the name high intensity discharge lamp, HID. Now, you may hear that quite a few times. Another name you see is HQI. Now, HQI is actually a trademark from Osram. For the sake of this video, HQI, HID, HID, and halide, all the same thing. And as I said before, they come in a range of wattages and sizes. In fact, some of them even emit UVB, really useful for reptiles. In Europe, they're super popular. For some reason, they never really made it quite as big in the UK or indeed in US or Canada. And I think that's something to do with some of the things we're going to talk about today. So why use one of these lamps in the first place? Well, that's a great question, but I will say they aren't for everyone. The primary reason they're used is the absolute fantastic spectrum that they can give off. Now, not all of them do, but the good ones are so bright and have such a good quality spectrum that they can fulfill a role in an enclosure that no other lamp can. I personally use halides in most of my enclosures where it's reasonably possible. And my experience in working with them in a professional setting as well as in my personal setting, I find that animals really respond well. Tortoises, Uromastyx, bearded dragons, Cyclora really love the light that these things give off. In fact, I've seen animals follow the lamp around the enclosure when we move it around because they prefer to bask under it than other lamp sources. Heck, I've even seen snails bask under them. Is it an economical option? Well, it depends on how you look at it. The ones I usually recommend for home use tend to come in 3 main wattages, and that's 35 watts, 50 watts, and 70 watts. And normally, I'll go recommending a lamp that has a screw base like this, your standard sort of lamp. And at 70 watts, for example, you'll be consuming, no prizes, 70 watts of electricity. And that 70 watts has to go somewhere. Now, a lot of it gets emitted as light, but these lamps do get hot. And using one alongside, say, a 75 watt heat lamp and a 24 watt T5 UVB system, you can quite quickly rack up a high energy bill, and that's speaking from experience. Compare that to a nice bright LED, which can use as little as, say, 25 watts. It's easy to see why an LED may be preferred, but I think the spectrum is what makes a halide better. So what's the spectrum like then? Well, on the good lamps, it's shockingly good. Here's an example of a typical LED. Now you can see that there is no UVA emitted, there is no violet emitted, and there is very little to any red emitted. In fact, the colour rendering of these lamps tends to be pretty low. Compare that to a high quality halide lamp, and we get an amazing sunlight proportion of UVA1 to visible light. It's really something that nothing else can do. And this is super bright light that lasts for years and years. Is it easy to set up? Compared to an LED, a halide isn't really as simple to set up. For one, you can't just plug it in and go. A halide requires something called a ballast to make it work. Now, if you've used a fluorescent UVB system, you've used a ballast before. In fact, here's a typical UVB T5 system, and that's the ballast. The only difference between this ballast and the ballast that you would use for a metal halide is that there is a wire connecting them. And with the T5s, the ballast is rated for the wattage of the lamp that you need to use. So you want to use a 24 watt T5, you need a 24 watt ballast. Same thing for a metal halide. If you want to use a 35 watt metal halide lamp, you're going to need a 35 watt ballast. And there are some ballasts that have wattages that can be changed. For example, this one from Mega Ray allows you to change the wattage from 35 to 50 to 70, which allows you to use the 3 most popular types of lamp. And rather than plugging straight into the wall, all you do is you plug the ceramic fixture into the ballast and then the ballast into the wall. And they actually have these quite nice quick release plugs that let you kind of easily use them when plugging them in and out, which makes it a lot easier. What's the actual cost though? This ballast costs money. In fact, this Mega Ray one costs about £90 in the UK. Then if you want to plug that into, say, a dome fixture, you may need to wire it in, which if you're not comfortable doing, you may need to pay someone else to do that for you. Then the lamp itself, which can cost, say, 50 Great British pounds. So you can see how quite quickly you rack up a cost. You get maybe £150 startup cost versus, say, £50 for an LED. And if you're using a UVB lamp, you may need to replace it on a regular basis, say every 12 months. So there's an annual cost there as well. But the higher cost for me is really worth it considering the spectrum. And in terms of running the lamp, you can calculate this like you would with any other electrical item. You can take your wattage, you can take how many hours a day you use it, and you can calculate based on your rates in your area, and you can find out how much it's going to cost you to run over a year or a month or however much you want. So they aren't cheap, and they aren't something you can try and cheap out on either by getting cheaper versions. But to be honest, that's reptile lighting as a whole. Much of the time you get what you pay for. So let's look at one turned on. I have a selection of quite a few here. Some of them are reptile ones that emit UVB, as I say, and some of them are human grade ones. Now, in terms of spectrum, I prefer the human grade ones because of the visible light, and UVA1 is much more refined. And I'm going to show you something else that people tend to get put off by when they first buy one. I'm going to turn it on now, and you should see that this one here is going to turn on, and you may see that it may start to flicker a few times. This is totally normal, and it's actually part of the warm-up process for the lamp. The other thing that happens is that the ballast can make a flickering, buzzing sound. Again, totally normal, it just sometimes puts people off. And they actually get quite scared of it when it happens for the first time. But give it 10-15 minutes and this lamp will be warmed up and ready to go. As I say, if you've used a T5 before, then you've probably seen this sort of turn on behaviour before where it kind of slowly warms up. That's totally normal. Let's compare it to an LED, which, as you know, turns on pretty much instantly. Now, this is all well and good, and you can sort of see that they're very similar in brightness, at least to our eyes, but to a reptile, they're very different. This is because the halide emits UVA1 at really nice proportional levels. And this is really good because it means that this light is actually white to the reptiles, which an LED is not, and that's despite the marketing. And as we say, we can measure the lux. So if I grab my lux meter here, and this isn't a scientific experiment or any sort of controlled environment, this is more just to make a point. If I take readings of these lamps, I can see that they both emit at, 30 centimeters, around 20,000, 30,000, 40,000 lux, somewhere around there. And that's quite a lot. But remember, lux in itself is a human-centric measurement. This will measure based on human vision and not reptile vision. We can't transfer those readings to man-made lights such as LEDs. But we can if the spectrum is similar to sunlight, which is what the halide is in this case. So we can't necessarily use lux to measure true brightness unless we know the spectrum of the measurements we're taking. And we know that LEDs aren't true white to reptiles. So the lux value is more appropriate for the halide than it is for the LED when we're talking about reptile lighting. But what about UVB lamps? Well, a UVB emitting halide works in pretty much the same way as the human grade one, except there are different chemicals used to allow it to produce UVB in usually a fairly uniform way. These UVB lamps are obviously a specialist use, so they only come from specialist brands. We have things like Solar Raptor, Lucky Reptile, Mega Ray, and obviously the bigger brands too, like Exoterra and Zoomed. All the good brands have really good quality halides. And I've actually got a reptile one installed in here, so let's turn that one on. I'm just gonna turn it on the wall. And if I get my UVI solar meter and just pop it under, you should hopefully start to see, at least from where you are, the brightness slowly picks up. And this is the same thing, it's getting warm. And as it's doing that, the UVI will increase. And I'll superimpose a quick image of the UVI increasing over time. And what you may spot in the video is that the UVI can jump up and then down and then up and then down again as it tries to level out. Now this is perfectly normal, and yet again another reason as to why we need to wait 10, 15, 20 minutes before we start measuring our lamps. So whilst it's warming up, let's go to the next question. Is this suitable for my XYZ animal? Halides can be used in a whole range of setups, and it's just like any other lamp. You wouldn't use, for example, a 54 watt, 12% T5 high output lamp 10 centimeters away from a leopard gecko, and you wouldn't use a little piddly 25 watt heat lamp 2 meters away from a Euromastix. It's the same thing that applies to halides. You need to find the right wattage and the right distance for the right species. Let's take a quick look at this. We've kind of settled out at maybe UVI 9.1, and that's pretty high. So I wouldn't recommend this lamp this far away from an animal. What I would normally do is say we either need to lift it further away or change the lamp for something that emits less UV. And all the manufacturers provide information on how to do this. They all give guides on how far away the animal needs to be and how far away you need to be to get the appropriate level of UVB. And of course, I recommend using, say, a solar meter to kind of fine-tune those distances if you can. That's really helpful because it lets you get the distance just right, and it also allows you to monitor the lamp's decay. Now, you can't use power density, say the ISM 400, as a measurement for these lamps. It doesn't work the same as it does with a heat lamp. If you're going to use a human-grade metal halide, you don't need to monitor UVB at all because there is no UVB to monitor. In fact, you can just base it on the lux. Now, just be careful because they do get quite hot under them, so you need to monitor your temperatures as well. And there's no reason that you can't use a metal halide over a temperate chameleon, over a leopard gecko, over a bearded dragon, a cyclora, anything like that. In fact, there's no reason you can't use them over a primate. You just need to make sure that the lamp you're using is correct at the correct distance for the animal you've got. Quick interlude, because I just want to say thank you so much to everybody for all the really nice messages we've had over these silly little videos that we're doing on tortoise food and things like that. This is crazy. This whole video thing is just a complete side project. Kind of a bit of fun, but I kind of like doing it. My actual job involves testing lights, consulting on the manufacturer, and consulting vets, zoos, private keepers on how to properly light their animals in captivity. If you want to find out more about what we actually do at Damascus, you can go to www.damascus.co.uk, and you can also donate to some of the testing that we do. And a lot of it is public, so the donations go towards those public tests. Again, that's www.damascus.co.uk. So how long do halides last? Well, all of these lamps will emit visible light for many, many years, providing you look after them right. But if you're worried about UVB, then the best way to monitor the decay is with a solar meter. Now, regardless of the UVB source you use, be it a fluorescent, a compact fluorescent, a metal halide, a mercury vapor, they will all decay. They decay in slightly different ways depending on the lamp technology, but they do all decay. The UVB will degrade or go away over time. And the best way to monitor it is with a solar meter. And most manufacturers do give a 12-month or 6-month guarantee on their lamps. How can I make sure that I get the most out of my lamp? There are things, of course, that can cause premature decay or even premature death of any lamp. So this is Tom's top 6 tips on how to prolong the life of your metal halide lamp. Number 1 is do not plug them into a dimmer or a thermostat of any kind. Number 2, the first time you turn them on, make sure you leave them on for at least 1 hour. Now this stems from some old advice where it used to be to let the chemicals bed in, but it's still really good practice. Number 3 is to try your best to only turn them on and off once a day. What you don't want to do is keep turning the lamp on and off and moving it around the enclosure. Number 4 is if you do need to turn it off, you need to give it 10 to 15 minutes to cool down before trying to turn it back on again. This is because when we turn them back on, we need the lamp to vaporize the chemicals in the right sequence. Number 5 is try and keep them cool. Now this applies to pretty much all lamps, and I recognize that they get hot, so you need to try and keep them cool where you can. Airflow is their best friend. Number 6 is don't be fooled by wattage. A 35 watt UVB emitting metal halide may actually have a higher UVI than a 70 watt from the same brand in the same product line. It's actually about measuring the UVI, not necessarily the wattage. Now they do sound like a lot of work. Yeah, they can be, and that's probably the biggest reason why people don't want to get them. But if I was to summarize and make a for argument and an against argument, I think the for argument would be that they have this fantastic spectrum, and the against argument would be that they're just a little bit more difficult to set up than other lamps. But really, I think the effort is worth it. For the spectrum that you get out of these things, it's worth putting in that little bit extra effort, and that's reptile lighting. Surely what we want to do is find joy in creating this perfect enclosure for our animals. I mean, it could be a utopia in our own home, and that little bit of effort can make it all the better. Now, I'm an advocate for good lighting, and I genuinely think that metal halide lamps can provide something that no other lamp that we have can provide. But I do think that anyone wanting to use them needs to research them properly. And a good way to research them is find out what other people are doing with similar lamps. So when you do go on those WhatsApp groups, those Facebook pages, those Discord servers, try and give them as much information to go off as possible. Tell them things like your budget, whereabouts you are in the world, and things like the species you're keeping and how far away the lamp is going to be from the animal, as well as the enclosure size. It helps so much get this extra information, because what it enables them to do is put the pieces together and help you get the better light out of it. So let me know what you think. Go ahead, like the video, do all that good stuff, but also leave a comment. Let me know if you use halides, if you've ever considered using halides, why you haven't, why you might do now, why you might not now. Heck, maybe I've not covered something and you want some extra questions answering. Let me know, and I will see you when I see you.